December 14th, 1931. Woodley Airfield near Reading, England. The morning air is crisp and cold. The grass is wet with frost. On the runway sits a Bristol Bulldog. It is a biplane, a fragile skeleton of wood and canvas held together by tension wires and a roaring Jupiter engine. Climbing into the cockpit is a 21-year-old man named Douglas Bader. Remember that name, because right now he is not a hero, he is not a legend, he is just a kid. A talented, athletic, handsome, and incredibly arrogant kid. Bader was the type of pilot who thought the laws of physics were just suggestions. He was the star of the Royal Air Force rugby team. He was the best pilot in his squadron, and he knew it. Earlier that morning in the officers' mess, a civilian pilot had challenged him. The man had sneered at Bader and said, "I bet you would not dare to do a slow roll at ground level. A slow roll is a difficult maneuver at 2,000 feet. At ground level, it is a death sentence." But Douglas Bader had an ego bigger than his aircraft. He looked at the man and said, "Watch me." He takes off. The engine roars. The wind whips against his leather helmet. He circles the airfield. He drops altitude, lower, lower, until he is skimming the grass. He is flying at 100 miles an hour just feet above the ground. He initiates the roll. The plane turns upside down. For a split second, he is hanging in his straps, watching the world inverted. But he is too low, and he is too slow. The left wingtip clips the grass. At that speed, the ground hits like concrete. The wing crumples. The nose of the plane slams into the earth. The Bristol Bulldog cartwheels across the airfield in a cloud of dirt and debris. The sound of twisting metal and snapping wood echoes across the valley. And then, silence. The rescue crew rushes to the wreck. They expect to find a body. The cockpit is crushed. The fuselage is a twisted knot. They pull Bader out. He is unconscious. He is covered in oil and blood. His legs are trapped under the crushed rudder pedals. They rush him to the Royal Berkshire Hospital. The surgeons take one look at his legs and shake their heads. The damage is catastrophic. The bones are shattered. Gangrene is setting in. To save the life of the man, they have to sacrifice the legs. They amputate his right leg above the knee, and his left leg below the knee. When Douglas Bader wakes up, the room is quiet. A doctor stands over him. The doctor looks at this young, vibrant athlete and delivers the news that ends his life. "You will never walk again without crutches. You will never play rugby again, and you will certainly never fly a plane again." For 99% of the human population, this is the end of the story. This is the moment where you accept your fate. You accept that you are now an invalid. You accept a life of sitting in a wheelchair and watching the world go by. But Douglas Bader was not part of that 99%. This brings us to the psychology of the man, and this is important to understand. Throughout history, arrogance is seen as a negative trait. We are taught to be humble. We are taught to be modest. But in extreme survival situations, humility can be a death sentence. Psychologists call this adaptive narcissism or extreme self-efficacy. It is a refusal to accept reality when reality is unacceptable. Bader did not just have hope. He had a delusional level of confidence. He genuinely believed that the doctors were wrong, that the RAF was wrong, and that the entire world was wrong. His arrogance, the very thing that caused his crash, became the only thing that could save him. He did not view the loss of his legs as a tragedy. He viewed it as an insult that he had to answer. The recovery process was brutal. In 1931, prosthetics were not made of carbon fiber. They did not have microprocessors or hydraulic knees. They were made of aluminum and tin. They were hollow, they were heavy, and they were strapped to the body with complex leather harnesses that dug into the skin. Bader called them his tin legs. The first time he tried to stand, he collapsed. The pain was excruciating. The stumps of his legs were still healing. Putting weight on them felt like walking on knives. The nurses brought him a walking stick. Bader looked at it with disgust. He said, "I'm not going to use a stick. I am going to walk like a man." He stood up. He took a step. Clunk. He took another step. Clunk. He fell. He hit the floor hard. The nurses rushed to help him. He shouted at them to get away. He dragged himself up. He did this for weeks, sweat pouring down his face, gritting his teeth until they nearly cracked. Clunk. Step. Fall. Get up. Clunk. Step. Fall. Get up. He treated rehabilitation like a war. Every step was a battle. Every room he crossed was a victory. Within 6 months, he was driving a car. He had modified the pedals himself. Within a year, he was playing golf. He would plant his metal feet in the grass, swing the club, and sometimes lose his balance and fall over. He would just laugh, get up, and hit the ball again. He learned to dance. He learned to play squash. He became a master of movement. He realized that if he kept his momentum going, the heavy tin legs would swing forward naturally. But walking was not enough. Golf was not enough. Douglas Bader looked at the sky. He went back to the Royal Air Force headquarters. He walked into the office of the Undersecretary of State for Air. Imagine the scene. A man walks in. He walks with a strange, stiff-legged gait. Clunk, clunk, clunk. He stands before the most powerful men in the Air Force and says, "I am ready to return to duty." The officers looked at him like he was insane. They said, "Mr. Bader, you have no legs, you cannot operate the rudder pedals, you cannot feel the aircraft. You are a liability." Bader argued, he bullied, he used his connections. He refused to leave the building until they gave him a chance. Finally, just to get rid of him, they agreed to a flight test. They figured he would get in the plane, realize he could not do it, and go home. They sent him to the Central Flying School. It is 1939. The clouds of war are gathering over Europe. Hitler is moving his armies. The world is holding its breath. On a grassy airfield, Douglas Bader climbs into a Harvard trainer. This is the moment of truth. Getting into a plane is hard enough for a person with legs. For Bader, it was a gymnastic feat. He had to haul his body weight up onto the wing, drag his tin legs behind him, and drop into the narrow cockpit. He strapped himself in. Looked at the instrument panel. It had been 8 years since he had touched a control stick. He fired the engine. The propeller spun to life. He taxied to the runway. He pushed the throttle forward. The plane roared down the strip. Bader felt the familiar vibration. He felt the lift under the wings. The wheels left the ground. And in that moment, the miracle happened. On the ground, Douglas Bader was a cripple. He was slow. He was clumsy. He was heavy, but in the air, he was weightless. The plane did not care that he had no legs. The plane only cared about his hands and his mind. Bader realized something profound. The rudder pedals, which control the left and right movement of the plane, were actually easier to push with his artificial legs. His metal feet did not get tired. They did not cramp. They were solid anchors. He took the plane up to 3,000 feet. The instructor in the back seat was nervous. He was ready to take control if Bader panicked. But Bader did not panic. He smiled. He threw the plane into a tight turn. He pulled back on the stick. He executed a perfect loop. He rolled the aircraft with a precision that most pilots with 2 legs could not match. He landed the plane so gently that the instructor barely felt the wheels touch the grass. Bader taxied back to the hangar. He turned off the engine. He unstrapped his helmet. He looked at the instructor, who was sitting there with his mouth open. Bader did not ask if he passed. He did not ask for permission. He simply said, "I think you will find that my legs do not work the pedals, but my soul flies the plane." The report went back to headquarters. It was short. It said, "This man is exceptional." The Royal Air Force had a decision to make. They were desperate for pilots. The Germans were building the greatest air force the world had ever seen. Britain needed every man who could hold a stick, even if that man had to be carried into the cockpit. They gave him his wings back. They gave him a uniform, and soon they would give him a Spitfire. The boy who refused to quit had returned. The doctors were wrong. The rulebook was wrong. Douglas Bader was back in the sky, and the German Luftwaffe had no idea what was coming for them. They were about to face the only pilot in the world who could not bleed out from a high G turn. They were about to face the Legless Ace. May 1940. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. The situation across the English Channel is catastrophic. France is collapsing. The British Army is retreating to Dunkirk, and the German Luftwaffe is preparing to burn London to the ground. In the middle of this disaster, Douglas Bader is given his first command. He is sent to Colditz Castle to take over the 242nd Squadron. This was a Canadian squadron, and to be honest, they were a mess. They had been fighting in France. They had lost their best men. Their equipment was dirty. Their uniforms were unkempt. Their morale was non-existent. They felt abandoned by the Air Force. And then a car pulls up. Out steps their new commander, a man with no legs, a man who clunks when he walks. The pilots looked at him with disbelief. They thought the RAF was mocking them. They thought, great, we are already losing and now they send us a cripple to lead us. Bader sensed the tension immediately. He stood in the mess hall. He looked at the dirty boots. He looked at the unshaven faces. He did not give a patriotic speech. He did not yell. He simply said, I want you to meet me at the airfield in 30 minutes. Bring your planes. 30 minutes later, the squadron was in the air. Bader took the lead. He threw his Hurricane fighter into a series of maneuvers that would make a stunt pilot vomit. He rolled. He looped. He flew inverted just feet above their heads. He challenged them to keep up. They could not. By the time they landed, the mood had changed. The Canadians realized that this man was not a cripple. He was a demon. Bader told them, I do not care about your rules. I do not care about your appearance. I only care about killing Germans. He got them new equipment. He got them tools. He turned them from a group of victims into a pack of wolves. But as the air war started, the other pilots began to notice something strange. Something that defied logic. In a dogfight, the difference between life and death is often measured in inches. It is about how tight you can turn. If a German Messerschmitt is on your tail, you have to turn hard to shake him. If you are chasing him, you have to turn harder to keep him in your sights. The pilots noticed that Douglas Bader could turn his plane sharper than anyone else. He could sustain high-speed turns for longer than humanly possible. This was not just skill. This was biology. To understand why Bader was so deadly, we have to look at the physics of the human body. It is called G-force. When a fighter plane banks hard at 300 miles an hour, centrifugal force kicks in. The pilot is pushed down into his seat. At 1 G, you feel normal. At 3 GS, your arms feel like lead. At 5 GS, your body weighs 5 times its normal weight. But the real danger is inside your circulatory system. Imagine a bucket of water. If you spin it around, the water is forced to the bottom. The same thing happens to your blood. When a pilot pulls a high G turn, gravity forces the blood away from the head. It rushes down the torso and pools in the legs. This creates a critical problem. The brain is starved of oxygen. First, the pilot loses color vision. The world turns gray. This is called a grayout. If the turn continues, the vision narrows. It looks like you are looking through a tunnel. And finally, if the pilot does not ease off the stick, the brain shuts down completely. Total darkness. Unconsciousness. This is called GLOC. G-force-induced loss of consciousness. Every pilot in World War II had to fight this limit. If a German pilot tried to turn too hard to escape Bader, he would start to black out. He would have to loosen his turn to let the blood return to his brain. But Douglas Bader was a medical anomaly. Think about his anatomy. When Bader pulled a 6G turn, the blood in his body tried to rush down, but it hit a dead end. He had no calves. He had no feet. There was no massive reservoir for the blood to pool in. Because his legs were gone, the blood stayed in his torso, it stayed in his heart, and most importantly, it stayed in his brain. While the German pilots were fighting to stay awake, battling the gray veil of unconsciousness, Bader was wide awake. His vision was crystal clear. His reaction times were perfect. He was immune to the one thing that limited every other human being in the sky. He used this to devastating effect. He developed a tactic. He would dive at a German formation at full speed. The Germans would brake left or right, expecting the British pilot to follow a standard curve. Instead, Bader would yank the stick back. He would pull a turn so tight that it would rip the wings off a lesser plane. He would cut inside the German's turn radius. The German pilot would check his mirror thinking he was safe. And suddenly, he would see the nose of Bader's Hurricane filling his view. It was terrifying. It seemed like magic. Bader famously said, "I think I have an advantage. The blood can't go to my feet because I don't have any." Under his leadership, the 242 Squadron became legends. They painted a cartoon of Hitler getting kicked in the pants on the side of their planes. Bader scored his first kills, a Dornier, a Heinkel, a Messerschmitt. He was aggressive. He was ruthless. He wanted to get so close to the enemy he could see the color of their eyes. But Bader was not just a killer. He was becoming a tactician. He started to look at the bigger picture of the Battle of Britain, and he did not like what he saw. The Royal Air Force was fighting a defensive war. The commanders in the South, like Keith Park, were sending up small groups of fighters, 6 planes here, 12 planes there. They were trying to intercept massive German raids with handfuls of aircraft. Bader thought this was suicide. He thought it was a waste of good pilots. He argued that you cannot stop a flood with a bucket. You need a dam. He started to formulate a plan that would go against every rule in the RAF book. He did not want to lead 12 planes. He wanted to lead 60. He wanted to create a massive formation that would sweep the Germans from the sky, a wall of Spitfires and Hurricanes. He called it the Big Wing. And this controversial idea would set the stage for the bloodiest showdown of the entire war. But that is a story for the next part. August 1940. The Battle of Britain is raging and Douglas Bader is angry. He is not angry at the Germans. He is angry at his own commanders. Every day he sits in his cockpit watching the radar reports. He sees the British strategy unfold and he hates it. The Royal Air Force was using a tactic called the sponge defense. They were sending up fighters in small groups, 12 planes, sometimes only 6. Their job was to harass the German bombers, to nip at their heels, to disrupt them. Bader called this suicide. He marched into the headquarters of Air Vice Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory. Bader was just a squadron leader. He had no authority to question a general, but remember, this is the man who refused to believe he was disabled. He certainly was not going to be silenced by rank. He slammed his hand on the map table. He said, "Sir, it is simple mathematics. You are sending 12 of our boys to fight 100 of theirs. You are feeding them into a meat grinder." Bader proposed a radical change. He said, "Stop sending us up in packets. Let us assemble. Let us group 3, 4, 5 squadrons together." He wanted to launch 60 fighters at once, a massive formation that would hit the enemy with overwhelming force. He called it the Big Wing. Now, to understand why this was such a huge controversy, we have to look at the tactical trade-off. This is the tactical dilemma of 1940. On one side, you have the small wing approach used by Keith Park in the South. The advantage is speed. A small group can take off and be in battle position in 5 minutes. They can intercept bombers before they hit their targets. On the other side, you have Bader's Big Wing. The advantage is pure firepower. 60 planes can destroy an entire German formation. The psychological impact is massive, but the disadvantage is time. It takes 20 minutes for 60 planes to take off, form up, and climb to altitude. In those 20 minutes, the German bombers could already bomb London and be on their way home. The High Command argued that the Big Wing was too slow. They said it was unwieldy. Bader argued that the small wing was ineffective. He said, "We might be late, but when we arrive, we will wipe them out." Leigh-Mallory decided to take a gamble. He gave Bader the green light. He said, "Okay, Douglas, show me what you can do." Bader spent the next few weeks drilling his pilots. He taught them to fly in tight formations. He taught them to attack as a single organism. September 15th, 1940. This is the day that would decide the fate of the war, Battle of Britain Day. The German Luftwaffe launched their largest raid yet. Hundreds of bombers, escorted by hundreds of fighters, heading straight for London. They believed the RAF was on its knees. They believed Britain had no planes left. The call came through to Bader's airfield. Scramble. Bader climbed into his cockpit, but this time he was not alone. Behind him, engines roared to life across 3 different airfields. 19 Spitfires from Squadron 616, 17 Hurricanes from Squadron 302, and Bader's own Squadron 242. They took off. They circled. They formed up. It took time. Valuable minutes ticked by while London burned. The tension on the ground was unbearable. But then they turned south. Imagine the view from the German cockpit. A German bomber pilot looks out his window. He expects to see the usual 6 or 12 British planes easily fought off by his escorts. Instead, he looks up. And diving out of the sun is a wall of machines. 60 British fighters, wingtip to wingtip, engines screaming, guns armed. Bader led the charge. He yelled over the radio, "Line up, pick your targets, fire." It was not a battle, it was a massacre. The big wing tore through the German formation like a chainsaw. German bombers exploded in mid-air. Fighters spiraled into the ground. The sky was filled with parachutes and black smoke. The Germans panicked. They broke formation. They dropped their bombs harmlessly in the fields and turned back for France. That single day, the RAF claimed 56 German aircraft destroyed. It was a decisive victory. 2 days later, Adolf Hitler suspended Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. He realized he could not control the skies as long as the RAF could field that kind of firepower. Douglas Bader had been vindicated. His stubbornness, his arrogance, and his refusal to follow the rules had helped save the nation. He became a national icon. The man on 10 legs who led the big wing. But victory can be dangerous. It breeds overconfidence. Bader began to feel invincible. He began to take bigger risks. He started flying further into enemy territory looking for trouble. He believed that nothing in the sky could touch him. But in the summer of 1941, over the fields of northern France, his luck was about to run out. And this time, not even his 10 legs would be enough to save him from the fall. Summer 1941. The Battle of Britain is won, but the war is far from over. Douglas Bader is now a wing commander. He is 31 years old. And he is flying the new Spitfire Mark V. A machine that is faster, deadlier, and more powerful than anything he has flown before. Bader has changed his strategy. He is no longer waiting for the Germans to come to England. He is taking the fight to them. He leads massive sweeps over northern France. He is hunting the Luftwaffe in their own backyard. His score is rising. 20, 21, 22 confirmed kills. He is the 5th highest scoring ace in the Royal Air Force. He is a celebrity. But with fame comes arrogance, and with arrogance comes danger. Bader began to believe his own legend. He started breaking the rules. He would fly lower than he should. He would stay in the fight longer than he should. He felt invincible, but in the air nobody is invincible. August 9th, 1941. A bright Saturday morning. Bader leads his wing across the English Channel. They are heading for the French coast near Le Touquet. He spots a formation of German Messerschmitt 109s below him. Without waiting for backup, Bader dives. He is flying fast, too fast. He separates from his wingman. He is alone in a sky filled with enemies. He lines up a Messerschmitt. He fires. The German plane explodes. He pulls up. He spots another pair of Messerschmitts flying left. He banks hard towards them. And then, disaster. Historians still debate what happened next. Some say he collided with a German fighter. Others say he was hit by friendly fire from one of his own men. But for Douglas Bader, it did not matter. There was a massive jolt, a sound like a sledgehammer hitting a tin roof. The entire rear section of his Spitfire was torn away. The propeller stopped. The engine died. The plane immediately flipped over and went into a violent spin. Bader was trapped inside a metal coffin, falling towards the earth at 400 miles an hour. The G-forces were crushing. The noise of the wind screaming through the broken fuselage was deafening. Bader knew the drill. He had seconds to live. He reached up, he slid the canopy back. The rush of cold air hit him in the face. He unstrapped his harness. He prepared to jump. He pushed himself out of the cockpit. His head and shoulders were out in the open air. He was halfway to freedom. But then he stopped. He could not move. He pulled. He struggled. He kicked. But he was anchored to the dying plane. He looked down into the cockpit. His right leg, his artificial tin leg, had become wedged under the rudder pedal. The metal foot was twisted and locked in place. Imagine the horror. The ground is rushing up to meet him. The plane is spiraling out of control, and he is physically bolted to the wreckage. He pulled until his muscles screamed. He was suspended halfway out of the plane, the wind tearing at his flight suit. He had a choice to make, and he had to make it in a split second. He could stay with the plane and die. Or he could leave his leg behind. Bader reached down into the cockpit. The G-forces made his arms feel like lead. He found the leather strap that connected the artificial leg to his waist. He found the buckle. With freezing fingers, he undid the clasp. Snap. The leg detached. Bader was sucked out of the cockpit instantly. He fell away from the plane. The Spitfire, with his right leg still trapped inside, spiraled down and crashed into a field in a ball of fire. Bader tumbled through the air. He pulled the ripcord. The parachute opened with a crack. He floated down. Silence returned. But now a new reality set in. He was floating over Nazi-occupied France. He was dangling from a parachute, and he had only one leg. He hit the ground hard. Without his right leg to absorb the impact, his left artificial leg smashed into his ribs. The metal buckled. The impact knocked him unconscious. He lay there in the French grass, broken, battered, and helpless. When he opened his eyes, 3 figures were standing over him. They were German soldiers. They had their rifles pointed at him. They approached carefully. They expected to find a monster, the famous British Ace. What they found was a man lying in a tangle of parachute silk, missing a leg. They looked at the crash site nearby. They looked at Bader. They were confused. They were shocked. One of the Germans spoke a little English. He leaned down. He did not shout. He did not strike him. He simply said, "For you, the war is over." They picked him up. They carried him to a truck. Douglas Bader, the Eagle of the Royal Air Force, was now a prisoner of the Third Reich. But the Germans had made a mistake. They thought they had captured a cripple. They thought he was harmless without his legs. They had no idea who they had just put in their truck. And they certainly did not expect that this man, within 24 hours, would demand that the British Air Force bomb their base to deliver him a new leg. That is the incredible story of the next part. August 1941. Douglas Bader wakes up in a German hospital in St. Omer. He is in pain, his ribs are bruised, his left artificial leg is damaged, and his right leg is gone, smashed somewhere in a French field inside his burning Spitfire. He expects interrogation. He expects torture. He expects the Gestapo. Instead, the door opens and in walks a German officer, but not just any officer. It is Lieutenant General Adolf Galland, the most famous ace in the German Luftwaffe, a man with a cigar in his mouth and 70 kills to his name. Galland does not treat Bader like a prisoner. He treats him like a brother. He sits down. They smoke cigarettes. They talk about planes. They talk about tactics. They argue about who has the better gun sights. This brings us to a very strange moment in history, one that is hard to understand through modern eyes. In World War II, the air war was different from the ground war. On the ground, in Russia or the Pacific, the fighting was barbaric. It was a war of extermination. But in the sky over Western Europe, the pilots still believed in something called chivalry. They called themselves the Knights of the Air. They believed that once a man was shot down, he was no longer an enemy. He was an equal who had lost a game of chess. So when Bader looked at Galland and said, "Look, I cannot be a prisoner without my leg. Can you help me get a new one?" Galland did not laugh. He did not say no. He went to his superiors. He went to Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, and he got permission to do something insane. The Germans turned on their radios. They tuned into the international emergency frequency, and they sent a message to the Royal Air Force. They said, "We have captured Wing Commander Bader. He has lost his right leg. If you send a plane to drop a replacement leg, we guarantee safe passage. We will not shoot you down." Think about that. These two nations are bombing each other's cities into rubble. Civilians are dying by the thousands. And yet the German High Command is offering a ceasefire so a British pilot can walk again. The message reached London. The British High Command was suspicious. Winston Churchill smelled a rat, they thought. If the Germans are promising safe passage, it is probably a trap. They want to lure a plane in and shoot it down for propaganda. So the British replied, "No, we do not accept your safe passage, but we will deliver the leg." August 19th, 1941. The RAF launches a massive bombing raid over St. Omer. They send 6 Blenheim bombers escorted by a swarm of Spitfires. It is chaos. Anti-aircraft guns are firing. Bombs are exploding. And in the middle of this violence, one bomber opens its bay doors. But instead of a 500-pound bomb, a wooden crate tumbles out. Attached to the crate is a parachute. The crate floats down through the smoke. It lands softly in a field near the German airfield. The Germans rush out to retrieve it. They pry it open. Inside, nestled in straw, is a shiny new aluminum leg. But that is not all. The British had a sense of humor. They also included a pair of socks, a tin of tobacco, and a note that said, "To the German commander, please return the crate as we are short of wood." The Germans took the leg to the hospital. They presented it to Bader like a trophy. Adolf Galland came to visit him again. He smiled and said, "There you go, Major. Now you are whole again." The Germans thought Bader would be grateful. They thought that by showing him this kindness, he would settle down. He would be a gentleman prisoner. He would sit out the war in comfort. They clearly did not know Douglas Bader. The moment he strapped that leg on, his brain switched modes. He did not feel gratitude. He felt mobile. And if he was mobile, he had a duty to escape. That very night, Bader made his move. He was on the 3rd floor of the hospital. He had convinced a French maid to help him. He took his bedsheets. He tied them together into a rope. He opened the window. He looked down. It was a long drop. Remember, this is a man walking on 2 metal tubes. He has no sensation in his feet. His balance is precarious even on flat ground. He climbs out the window. He lowers himself down the rope. Clunk, clunk. He hits the ground. He hobbles across the courtyard. He makes it to the gate. He slips out into the darkness. He walks for miles. Every step is agony. His stumps are raw, but he keeps going. He reaches a safe house. A French family takes him in. They hide him in a barn. For a few hours, Douglas Bader is a free man. But the next morning, the hospital realizes he is gone. The Germans are furious. They feel betrayed. They gave this man a leg and he used it to run away. They launch a massive manhunt. They tear the town apart. They find him the next day, hiding in the straw. They drag him back to the hospital. But this time there are no cigarettes. There is no chivalry. The German commandant screams at him. He takes away his legs. He locks them in a cupboard. He tells Bader, "You have abused our trust. You are a dangerous man." They realized that a normal POW camp would never hold him. As long as he had legs, he would try to escape. So they made a decision. They were going to send him to a place built for the most stubborn, the most dangerous, and the most rebellious prisoners of war. A medieval fortress on a cliff. A place they claimed was escape-proof. Colditz Castle. And that is where the final chapter of our story begins. August 1942. Douglas Bader arrives at Colditz Castle. If you look at photos of Colditz, it looks like something out of a Gothic nightmare. It sits on a sheer rocky outcrop in Saxony. The walls are 7 feet thick. The drop from the windows is 100 feet down to the Mulde River. The Nazis called it Offlog 4C. It was the prison designed for the incorrigibles. The bad boys. The officers who had escaped from other camps. The men who refused to be broken. For Douglas Bader, it was the perfect home. But life in Colditz was a psychological war. The Germans had learned their lesson. They knew Bader was slippery, so they implemented a rule that was both effective and humiliating. Every night at lights out, a German guard would enter Bader's cell. He would wait while Bader unbuckled his leather harnesses, and then the guard would take Douglas Bader's legs away. They locked them in a separate room down the hall. Imagine the indignity. A wing commander, a hero of the Battle of Britain, left lying in a bunk, literally unable to stand up, powerless until morning. For most men, this would destroy their spirit, but Bader used it as fuel. If he could not fight them with a plane and he could not fight them with his legs, he would fight them with his mouth. He became the nightmare of the German garrison. He organized goon baiting campaigns. He would scream orders at the German guards, correcting their marching technique. He would refuse to salute. He would clog the roll call with endless complaints. He told the younger British officers, "It is not your right to escape. It is your duty. You must harass the enemy until the very end." He became the soul of the castle. When other prisoners fell into depression, they looked at the legless man dragging himself across the courtyard for exercise, and they found the strength to carry on. Spring, 1945. The sound of artillery gets closer. The Third Reich is collapsing. April 15th. The prisoners hear a low rumble. It is not thunder, it is diesel engines. The First United States Army rolls up to the gates of Colditz. The guards surrender. The gates swing open. Douglas Bader walks out. He is thinner. He is older. His face is lined with the stress of 4 years in captivity, but he is unbroken. He managed to catch a ride to Paris. And the first thing he did, he demanded a Spitfire. He wanted to fly one last combat mission. He wanted to take a shot at the retreating Germans. The Air Force gently told him, "No, Douglas, you have done enough, go home." He returned to London to a hero's welcome. 300 aircraft flew over the city to honor the victory, and leading the formation in the very front was Group Captain Douglas Bader. The war was over, but Bader's life was not. He left the Air Force. He went to work for Shell Oil. He traveled the world. He played golf with a handicap of 6, swinging hard on his metal legs. He drove fast cars. He lived life at full throttle, but his greatest work happened quietly away from the cameras. For the rest of his life, Bader visited hospitals. He visited veterans who had lost limbs. He visited children who were born disabled. He would walk into a ward clunking on his legs. He would look at a young man lying in bed, feeling sorry for himself because he had lost a foot. Bader would say, "Look at me, I have lost 2, and I flew a Spitfire. Now get out of that bed and learn to walk." It was tough love, but it worked. He gave thousands of people the permission to hope. Douglas Bader died of a heart attack in 1982. He was 72 years old. So what is the lesson here? Why do we still talk about this man 80 years later? It is not just because he shot down 22 planes. It is because Douglas Bader proved a psychological truth. We call it the advantage of disadvantage. When he lost his legs in 1931, everyone thought it was a tragedy. They thought it made him weaker. But in the air, that weakness became his greatest biological weapon. It kept him conscious when others blacked out. And on the ground, that weakness gave him a stubbornness that no prison wall could contain. He proved that a disability is only a limitation if you accept it as one. He proved that the human spirit does not reside in the legs or the arms or the eyes. It resides in the will. As Bader famously said, "Rules are for the obedience of fools and the guidance of wise men." He was no fool, and he certainly didn't follow the rules. If this story inspired you, please hit the like button. It helps us share these forgotten histories with the world. And tell me in the comments, do you think Bader's arrogance was his flaw, or was it the only thing that saved him? Make sure to subscribe. We have more stories of impossible bravery coming soon. Thank you for watching.